We want to make sure that we're not just throwing a net out and gathering up a bunch of people. We're actually looking for people who have an affinity and a love for what we do. And sometimes that's not obvious until we start doing research.
Hi, welcome to Insider Career Conversations. This podcast highlights non-traditional paths to careers and professions. I'm your host, Sylvia Juarez. I'm an education consultant and higher ed advocate. I have worked with different organizations and supported individuals as they've considered their options in different points of their lives. Insider Career Conversations explores professions with the fields, including educational background, job descriptions, and a unique day in the life of that professional. Our guests will discuss their journey and additional components in the field with occupational licenses or continued education. Discussions will be approached with ways to consider your professional path and the skill set needed to be successful. This season's conversations touch on development and fundraising roles and how they're a very important part of community and corporate engagement. My co-host Molly and I have worked together not only to explore our own interests and curiosities, but support others as they do the same. Hi, Molly. Can you believe it? Here we are again. I'm excited about exploring our experiences and seeing what are the things we can do to help audiences think through the next phases of their lives.
Yes. Hi, Sylvia. It is good to be back with you again. And I'm particularly interested in today's episode because I think it'll help us kind of paint with a broad brush what development is, and then actually do a deep dive into what I consider one of the most important areas of mastery and skill within our profession of development, which is prospect research.
Thanks so much for that, Molly. I know that development for me as an entrepreneur is tied in a couple of ways, depending on what I'm setting myself up for the day. Sometimes I'm looking for that networking to find projects to do. I'm pretty particular about the type of communities I want to be in. As you know, I'm passionate about working with first-generation communities, marginalized populations. So my development is really getting to know the community in terms of research for that area, but also making sure I understand what's happening within those populations so that I know how to proceed with a particular project. So development for me is probably a little different than for you as a nonprofit. Would you say? What are you thinking, sister?
Yeah, I would say that from your point of view, what you're doing is identifying a need. And then for a nonprofit, the next step then is who can help fill that need? Where can that need be exposed? Where can we engage people so that we can then support the mission of the nonprofit organization? And again, I think that's why it's exciting, our guest today, because she has a lot of experience in combining both of those and really doing that background and research work that then brings it all together.
Right. And, in our communities, I don't think individuals really understand that there's such a variety of not only development happening, or I guess a world of development happening within our communities in different ways, like we mentioned entrepreneurship and nonprofits. But I think Debbie will give us a perspective that's important when it comes to what prospecting really means, and then taking it to what that organization may benefit, and then the community at large benefits from. So I'm going to let you introduce her because she is your friend, and let you chop it up for a little bit while I listen at your feet and learn.
Well, everyone, I would like to introduce Debbie Logan, who is the prospect researcher at a university. Debbie and I have known each other, I can't really count up the years, but maybe 8 or 9 years. And she certainly had a life before the university and before her current role. So we'll talk about that, what education and experiences led her to the university. But Debbie, why don't you take it away and introduce yourself and what it is that you do?
Hi, I'm Debbie, and I work at a small private university that has a good history of relationships and foundation. And I do prospect research and management on about 3,000 or more individual people and households to help bring up the cream of the crop that we can actually make friends with and move forward to help support our causes and projects and program.
So Debbie, may I ask, when you say relationships, because when I'm, as an entrepreneur, relationships for me are getting to know individuals who may need my services, either individual families or school districts. When you talk about relationships, can you tell us a little bit about what that means to you? How does that lay against what you actually do with your job?
Well, the relationship aspect is I find people who have an affinity toward certain aspects of the university and their goals and mission. So I will do very intense research looking into already given data that has been collected throughout their years as an alumni and pinpoint certain pieces of that so that we don't reach out to people who are not interested in us. So we want to make sure that we're not just throwing a net out and gathering up a bunch of people. We're actually looking for people who have an affinity and a love for what we do. And sometimes that's not obvious until we start doing the research.
Right. And I think that leads to the cause, correct, Debbie, where you're making sure that the relationships are directly linked to a cause.
Yes.
Therefore, it's not necessarily just casting a wide blanket. And the reason I'm making that very deliberate attempt to put that as a platform is because those of us who have gone to a university, I went to a Division I public institution, and I say that specifically because I get numerous types of marketing from either athletics or from my department or from the university. And sometimes I feel that it's just a machine throwing out publications to the world and the mailman catches them and brings them to me.
You'd be correct, Sylvia.
Sometimes it is, yeah.
But I like what you're saying because I often feel like you're just trying to come to me because you need something versus what am I interested in supporting the university or the cause, because we're just talking about a university at this point. But what I'm hearing, Debbie, from you, you seem to be wanting to really build a relationship with your alumni. It's strategic. It's not just off into the world, as we're saying. So can you ladies continue to enlighten me in that? Because I'm fascinated now.
Well, and yeah, what I was going to say is the work that I used to do in a university differed from what Debbie does currently because I was kind of sending out that whole message to the world, the broad-based giving days. You know, it's your reunion time. There's a reason, there's a time to support your cause. Whereas I think Debbie can expand on the work that she does is really prepping a very specific type of ask. It's usually a much higher dollar value. So she's done the research to identify capacity. So somebody first has to have an affinity for the institution. There then has to be capacity to make what would be considered a larger significant gift. So I think that's where the two things differ, and both are equally important. One would be what we call annual or regular giving, which is where you kind of, oh, it's my time to make my $20 donation back to my alma mater. Whereas what Debbie is working on is much deeper, those longer relationships. She's queuing those up for individuals who work at that university or that institution to then take and really nurture for many, many years.
Excellent. And I appreciate that because having gone to a larger institution, and I'm public school all the way. I did my undergrad at a public school. I did my master's program at a public school. So I often get the Molly version of the leading back to giving, let's put it that way. But I really appreciate what Debbie is sharing because often, and I'm going to speak now with my Chicana hat on, often I think universities are painted in the light of they don't care about a certain cause, women's causes, Chicana causes, immigrant causes of that sort nature. But if I'm hearing Debbie, it has to do with finding an alum that can also want to donate to that particular cause.
Absolutely. And in my situation, since we're smaller, we're not that large kind of state university or public university, we have the opportunity to do kind of a tiered prospect research. So I can pull together a broader list of people that someone like Molly in her past roles could send out to a specific larger group of individuals or households, then we can narrow it down to a certain level of, well, we have all these alums from a certain background, could be their class year, could be their major, but we can also narrow it down to just women. We can narrow it down to Hispanic women. And since we're a Hispanic serving university, that's kind of what my work has been doing lately, is kind of bringing forward lists of people that already we think really want to help, but they don't know exactly how to do it. So that's where I come in, is I find those people and I hand over these names and information to our development officers, and then they can reach out and say, hey, how would you, after getting to know them and knowing exactly what they do have an affinity for, because you do have to have a conversation. Even if I do research, it's not just, oh, by the way, you don't want to go to them and say, hello, we know this about you. You get to know them.
Right.
And then if my research is good, then you will also find out from their own mouth that they are interested in that and have wanted to help and just didn't know how. So there's where our development officers step in and say, I can help you, help us, and make it more meaningful.
I love the fact that you're mentioning that you work at a university that is an HSI. That's a call to me that your institution is very deliberate about understanding their surroundings, understanding the state that they belong to. Very important. And appreciate the work that you're doing to promote that, because not all institutions are doing that. And that's my pet peeve because of the state that we are currently in. But that's a whole nother podcast episode.
Yeah.
What are some of the frustrations that you have as you're trying to communicate? Because now we're talking about communicating, right? We've done now the relationship seeking. Now we're about to communicate. Are there frustrations or are there peaks that you think a conversation adds to what you do?
Well, yeah, sometimes the conversations are very, very specific to a point where I want to say, I can't just give you these 3 people because they're a specific type of person, you know?
Right.
I mean, I can, but is that really where we want to go with that type of ask? Because they're going to look at it and they're going to say, well, you're just coming to me because I'm this or I'm that, not because you want to get to know me. So I think the broader relationship with a group of people is important because you're sending out a message, right? So it is a little difficult sometimes for a prospect researcher to pull up a list of people and just say, all these people have $1 million and, you know, when you know that there's so many other people out there who you can make relationships with, and you may not know because research doesn't always pull every bit of information on a person. So I leave it up to the development officers to really do their job after finding the basic information that they're seeking for a specific project and approach that with integrity. Yeah.
Right. So it's a little bit more organic, because I guess what I'm trying to find here, Debbie, is we often seek out numbers and we're seeking out data. But I think there is something to be said of making that transition from what that gives you to having the conversation, because I've seen some very painful conversations with individuals that, yes, you've researched, you've come across the information, how you do that, especially in this age of DEI and inclusion and equity versus equality. I think sometimes we gather this information, but we don't necessarily gather it in a way that can be translatable when it comes to what the cause is about. Because ultimately we need to remember there's a cause, there's individuals behind what we're trying to accomplish and support. But if we don't communicate the way we're supposed to, because I think Molly and I have talked about how communication is such a big part of this. So I don't know if Molly or Debbie wants to talk about communication. It really does lead to some successful points.
Well, and I would say from Debbie and I having worked together for many years, and even each of us holding different roles within the development office. So I think we each maybe between us have had 2 or 3 different of these roles. So Debbie talks about a development officer. That's a person who's the front facing out there meeting people. What I really appreciate about what prospect research managers like Debbie do is the fact that as that front facing person, I can come back and say, hey, I went to an event and I met so and so. I think they have an interest in this. Like I have to be listening as I'm conversing with people, and that takes different personalities too. So we've talked about that, Sylvia. What type of person works in development? Well, it can be somebody who likes to sit behind a computer and do research, but I can tell you that's also not Debbie's only aspect of her personality. She's very good in a group. But I think what's key is that it's a give and take. So let's say we kind of talk about the day in the life, so what does it look like? Maybe Molly, the development officer, has gone to an event, has met someone. I'm hearing things, I'm interacting, and I come back to the office and I say, now, Debbie, I think this and this person might have an interest in what maybe somebody else was doing some research on. Maybe it was for a different school within the university. So again, there might be graduate schools, there might be very specific clubs and organizations. Sports are a big thing that people like to support. So then Debbie puts her hat on and says, okay, well, this event happened. And there's one of me telling her, there's a whole bunch of people coming back saying, Debbie, do this research, find this out. And she's got to organize it all. And so I think that's one thing that a researcher is very good. Before you can make those communications happen, you have to be organized and thoughtful and strategic. And so then Debbie takes all the information that the gift officers are bringing back after these very exciting events, whether it's a sporting event, a reunion, something that might have happened at an off-campus location. And then she has to synthesize it all, do the research, and then give it back out to the development staff so that they can decide what's that targeted approach, what's the next communication. Does that become part of an affinity mailing? Does it become maybe a smaller event? Maybe it's at a large event. Maybe we had 8 different people express interest in one specific thing. So we create an event around that thing. And then Debbie's job is to do the research to make sure all the people who are going to attend have the information. And maybe, Debbie, that's a good point too, to talk about what is the research you're doing. You're kind of the stalker out there, right?
Yeah.
Gathering information. Yeah.
A stalk. Well, I'm not only gathering really good information on people, but I'm also looking for tidbits of gossip. So you kind of want to make sure that the people you're putting front facing in your organization as donors or even volunteers are people that are in line with your cause, mission, and values. So part of my job is actually, as Molly said, stalking people and looking into the kind of nitty gritty that we want to find out what makes them tick, especially when you're building an event around something like that. Is it going to turn out to be a casual event, or is it going to be one that's a little more formal based on the research of the people that I'm doing research on, so that when they walk away, it's a warm, fuzzy feeling and not wow, nothing I'm interested in there. So we don't want that.
Yeah, I've been to plenty of those events.
Yeah. So what I just do is, like Molly said, is I gather all the information, do a whole mess of research. I love doing research, and you can really get down some rabbit holes on some of these things. And as I work through my process, I have to make sure that I don't get sidetracked on some of those, because it can be very interesting. And
I can totally appreciate that. So Debbie, part of my job as a college coach is to tell students, and this is the whole point of my podcast, is different professions that individuals may consider and not stumble across. So this is all very interesting to me in that sense. So my question to you, Debbie, is, so now when I'm talking to a student that's interested in, let's say, communications, or maybe interested in data science, or even public relations, it sounds a little bit of that. The skill set that you need, I'm hearing, is the planning, obviously, the detail-oriented, the analytical, to be able to decipher between the numbers and the cause. What other skill sets do you have, or do you see make somebody successful in something like this? So if somebody who wants to make a pivot maybe into development and has always seen something very interesting about it, maybe, or doesn't even know what they're looking at is development, what would you say is something that we should be encouraging people to either gain as a skill or maybe encourage them to enhance?
I tell my younger student workers this too. Don't just think of yourself as what you've learned in school. There's so many experiences in life, right? So I came up through support roles, administrative assistant, assistant to a vice president for advancement. I did some office management in the financial field. So, and I've also got some plan giving experience through that career in the financial planning field. So all of these things use databases. So anybody who has any experience in using databases, I think high attention to detail is definitely important. You have specific information that you're trying to move through a process. Project organization, project management is another great skill to have. Most of the researchers I know and the development prospect managers have had some kind of library science in their background, which is, I never even knew that. Yes, library. Yeah. In fact, quite a few are library science bachelors or have a master's in some kind of library science, but I don't. But
Debbie, I'm gonna jump in and ask, do you think that is because there aren't as many jobs for librarians now as there used to be? So maybe some of those people with that specific education and skill set flipped into development research roles.
That's possible. That's very possible. But I also think they do have a great background in research because they know kind of how, having gone through, especially if they're younger now, because they've gone through the digital process of library research, which is, I'm learning, very immense. So I'm learning more and more from my librarians at the university as I do research, and from our marketing who follow via social media, our alums and what they're doing and important events in people's lives. And I think any of those types of careers can do research, and prospect research is just one aspect.
I would think it's how we've highlighted that background information. I mean, librarians have vast, background in terms of how they have to categorize the books or whatnot. Look, I'm going to geek out right now because I love libraries and I love librarians. And I think we've determined that that's going to be my next career is probably librarians. I won't be able to keep my mouth shut, but I'll be a librarian somewhere. So ladies, this has been such a fascinating conversation because I think for me, understanding my role as an alum and how that fits within what Debbie is trying to accomplish and what Molly has done in the past helps me to understand that there is some logic to how things are approached and how causes need to be met. And I'm just looking at it as someone who, they're not doing enough, whoever they may be, university, a nonprofit, in some cases, even my business, you're not doing enough, but a lot of it has to do with how much data do we have to be able to pursue whatever it is. And I think I've learned a lot. Thank you so much, ladies. I think this particular season will cover relationships, communication, strategic planning for sure as the threads to what development and fundraising does. Thank you so much, Debbie, for joining us today.
That's a great time. Thank you so much.
Molly, can you believe the conversations? We're talking about library studies, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep. We never knew. We learned something.
We never knew. So. Talk about engaging and getting everybody in the picture involved, right? So for everyone else, stay tuned for more insider career conversations that showcase career paths in development and fundraising. We appreciate you listening and look forward to next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Juarez Consulting. Learn more at juarezconsultinginc.com or follow us on social media or YouTube at Juarez Consulting.